I thank all of you for being here. I thank my friends at CBIA for convening this conference, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity both to essentially report to you on what's happening in Washington on the energy front, what's the deal in Washington, and then I want to leave time to both hear from you and to try to answer some of the questions that you might have. I thought I'd begin with a historical context. There's just been a publication of a book of letters and memos and opinions by my former colleague in the Senate from New York, the late and really great Pat Moynihan, an extraordinary thinker, a doer, just served presidents of both parties, and very insightful. And anyway, the book, in the book, there is a memo that Pat Moynihan, when he was then working for President Nixon, wrote to John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's domestic policy advisor, about what Moynihan called, and I quote, the carbon dioxide problem. This is 1969. And Moynihan concluded that the results of unchecked carbon dioxide pollution could be, quote, apocalyptic. And having served with Pat for several wonderful years, I can hear his voice in what he wrote, goodbye, New York. Goodbye, Washington, for that matter, end quote. Those were his words. The memo was based on a report delivered to the White House 4 years earlier, November 1965, almost 45 years ago, by a team of science advisors convened by President Johnson. The report concluded that existing efforts to curtail the flow of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere were, quote, barely enough to stay even, surely not enough to make the improvements that are needed, end quote. The panel of scientists also predicted that the burning of fossil fuels and the associated release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere would melt the ice caps, raise sea levels, warm the oceans, and affect crop yields. Now, most everyone, not everyone, but most everyone agrees they were right, and that's based on the science and what we can see. In June of 2009, the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which relies on scientific expertise from across our government, released its quadrennial report to Congress on the domestic impacts of global climate change, and it found the concentrations of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere were already producing the impacts their predecessors had predicted. Where Moynihan was worried about New York and Washington in 1965, we have reason, not today, not tomorrow, but in a foreseeable future to worry about New London, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Stamford. In other words, our coastline. 5 years after Moynihan sent that memo to Ehrlichman, President Nixon addressed the other part of this problem when he set a national goal. This was in 1970, that by the end of 1980, quote, the U.S. will not be dependent on any other country for the energy we need to provide our jobs, to heat our homes, and keep our transportation moving. I don't know about you, but Nixon looks better to me over time in terms of some of his insights and the things he did. Obviously, there were very bad blemishes on the record around Watergate, but I think Nixon understood that our national security and the long-term health of our economy depended on our ability to develop our own energy resources right here in Washington and in the United States. Every president from both parties since Nixon has set the same goal of energy independence. Some have also talked about dealing with climate change, but every president and Congress since then has failed to do what's necessary to really make the United States of America energy independent, which incidentally is exactly what's necessary to begin to deal with climate change. Today, we import nearly 70% of our petroleum, which means that every day we're sending, depending of course on the price at the time, more than $1 billion overseas to buy fuel. $1 billion every single day. Just imagine for a moment what we could do if we were spending and investing that money here in the U.S. We could create jobs, we could build infrastructure, we could energize our economy. We could stop depositing that money in the bank accounts of some of the world's most dangerous dictators who in turn are using our dollars against us. As Tom Friedman from the New York Times famously said a while ago, we are actually financing both sides in the war on terrorism. In 2008, for instance, the U.S. imported around 4 million barrels of oil a day from countries deemed dangerous or unstable by the United States Department of State. In the 45 years since that 1965 report, we've obviously failed to enact a national strategy to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. The states have acted, including the region Connecticut is part of. As you just heard, there are many innovative entrepreneurial companies that are acting to give people the option, but this cries out for a national answer, and it's not coming. As a result, the greenhouse effect that Moynihan described has intensified. I mean, just this summer we've seen a run of extreme weather, Russian flames, India underwater. We've experienced here in the U.S., including Connecticut, prolonged record-breaking temperatures. I just received a report from the regional head of EPA out of Boston that they're doing studies that are showing that lobsters are leaving Long Island Sound for cooler waters. We've had a pretty good aquaculture industry in our state over the years, and it's beginning to fade. And same is true, another study done by some scientists to show the movement of winter flounder out of the Sound and north. Now, do these movements mean, the end of the world as we know it? Of course not. But they are, in our time, the classic canary in the coal mine, and they're warning us of movements, changes in nature that are reflecting changes in temperature that we have reason to believe is coming from global warming. Scientific evidence really seems in so many different ways to show that to be true. So why aren't we doing anything national about it, or certainly as much as most people seem to think we should? People who don't, this is tough. I don't minimize this because it involves change, and it involves change in some of the fundamental ways in which our society is organized, in which our society is powered. But people who don't want us to do something about climate change or anything really significant claim that it will harm our economy. I disagree. I believe that if done right, comprehensive climate and energy independence legislation actually can do the opposite. It can not only stabilize our economy over the long term because it will guarantee a greater proportion of energy that we are in control of instead of dependent on others abroad who will be able to pull our economic chain, but also because it will create new jobs that are going to be in the new industries that will be part of this change, and you heard some of them already.